never say never again. Never, never say never again.
So a few months later, Never Say Never Again hit movie screens. Now there was a random series of events that led Sean Connery back to star again as Bond. A lot of just random luck that this happened, or maybe bad luck. It all started back in 1957. Ian Fleming collaborated on a screenplay with Jack Whittingham and Kevin McClory to make a Bond film. The film never happened and the screenplay was forgotten about, until Fleming used the screenplay for the basis of the ninth Bond novel, Thunderball, in 1961, which McClory and Whittingham did not receive any credit for. The two sued and received damages along with being credited in future versions of the novel. Because of this lawsuit, the film version, which was initially planned to be the first Bond film, was pushed back to 1965. McClory was given a producing credit for the adaptation and retained the rights to remake the film after 10 years had elapsed. After a few more years, some more legal fighting between McClory and Eon Films, the remake was announced in 1983. At first, George Lazenby was considered to be asked to star in this remake, the logic being that he was the most likely former Bond actor to agree. However, it was revealed that Connery might be interested. Since leaving Bond behind, Connery's film career had been sporadic at best. He did some good and bad films, but certainly didn't maintain the popularity and box office he had with his 007 films. By the early 80s, his status needed some polishing, and suiting up in the tux again seemed like it would be a good idea. Irving Kershner, the director of The Empire Strikes Back, signed on to direct. The original title for the film was to have been James Bond of the Secret Service. However, a court ruling sided with Eon Films that it sounded too similar to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So the eventual title came from a response by Connery's wife when, after Diamonds Are Forever, he had vowed he would never play Bond again. The film is an odd experience. It's odd because the film shouldn't have been made and it feels it when you're watching it. Somehow it just doesn't feel like a Bond film without that Bond theme. First, I have to say that with the return of Connery, it would have been nice to see him be given something better than just a remake of one of his earlier films. I ideally would have liked to have seen a brand new Bond adventure instead of just a remake of one that was already done and done well. Maybe a story that would have taken advantage of Connery's age and explored the idea of a retired 007 and what his life would be like. Sort of like what Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns did with the Batman character. An idea that the other films hadn't even touched on and would have made it radically different than anything that came before it. Of course, a new story wasn't possible and the only option was to remake Thunderball. So watching a poor retread of one of the better Bond films just feels like an empty experience. It plays more like a TV reunion movie of the week. It might have been better if they had gone with another actor as Bond. But Connery was the reason the project was getting so much attention, so they were stuck either way. The film does take a more serious take on Bond compared to Moore, but it's really not as much fun as it should be. It doesn't look as polished as the official Bond films. It actually looks dirtier or something. I don't know if it's intentional to give a grittier feel or what. The budget was much less than the Broccoli series, and it shows. It feels like a high school production of a Broadway play. A then relative unknown Kim Basinger plays Domino. She looks really hot, but isn't that memorable beyond that. The original Domino in Thunderball had a much more vulnerable quality about her. She was someone who was practically held captive by Largo, someone Bond could connect with and felt compelled to save. Basinger's Domino doesn't have any of that. She's just hot. And while that's nice for eye candy, if that's all there is to the character, it can get kind of boring. Maximilian Largo is actually an interesting take on a Bond villain. He's rich, powerful, evil, all the typical things, but he also has a bit of a neurotic insanity that seeps out every now and then. That makes him a bit more interesting.
You know that making love to Fatima was the greatest pleasure of your life?
Fatima Blush is a real exaggerated character, at times eye-rolling. She doesn't come close to topping the original Luciana Pelusi's more cunning performance of the character in Thunderball. Now watching her sexually sadistic character makes me wonder if she was the template for Xenia Onatopp 12 years down the road. Maybe she could have been her mother. Max von Sydow shows up as Blofeld, and he's just wasted here. He has his white cat, but apart from that, doesn't resemble the character from the earlier Bond films. The character of Blofeld, who had such a unique and mysterious screen presence and made such an impact in his previous appearances, is quickly forgotten in this interpretation. Most of the characters are played over the top, M is a snooty, stuck-up boss who is consistently insulting Bond and doesn't seem like he sees any value in him, while Bond doesn't seem to care. I can see not liking him, but he doesn't even seem like he thinks Bond is capable at his job. After watching their scenes together, I can't imagine why M would give him this assignment. But Bond gets the assignment anyway, or else there wouldn't be a movie. Moneypenny is here in a few extremely short encounters. She could have been any secretary, but Bond says her name, so we know who she's supposed to be. This Q is quite different from Desmond Llewellyn's take on the character. Here he's much more flippant in his attitude. Bernie Casey is Felix, and he and Connery just exchange their dialogue. You don't feel like the two have any history or that there's any real friendship between them. Rowan Atkinson, in his first film appearance, shows up as Bond's bumbling contact in the Bahamas. He's so inept it's hard to take him seriously. Connery doesn't exhibit too much enthusiasm. He was probably just trying to get his part completed as fast as he could. His age is kind of referenced in the film. Him trying to get back in shape, finally getting another assignment, Q's complaining about the situation since his absence. But it's kind of indirect and doesn't play much of a part in the story. He's back in action as simple as he was 20 years earlier. I do enjoy the short scene of him convincing the doorman that he just handed him a bomb. The dance number between Connery and Domino is not as elegant as I think it was supposed to be. For an action film, there's not a heck of a lot of it. The opening of the film, not a teaser opening, is Bond playing a war game over the credits. Not really anything special. The fight in the health spa is brief and not that exciting. Connery just gets thrown from one room to another. The biggest set piece is the motorcycle chase, and while it does try to rev things up, it's not as thrilling as it should be. A short horse chase is by the numbers and culminates in a cheesy blue screen shot of Connery falling in slow-mo. A bad match shot of the horse falling off the cliff doesn't help either. Somehow landing in the water, Connery lost his jacket, shirt, and shoes. There's a silly video game duel between Bond and Largo. Watching it now, you can't help but think it was only incorporated because of the popularity of video games at the time. They probably should have stuck to a card game. The shark scene is okay. The pace drags and just never picks up steam and gets moving. The ending feels rushed, and there's never any rewarding confrontation between Bond and the villain. When Bond finally defeats Largo and disarms the missile, it's done underwater and is just a murky, hasty conclusion to the film. For Bond fans, I suppose it's worth checking out for curiosity's sake, but other than that, you won't be missing much. This film probably did more for reigniting Sean Connery's career than anything else. After it came out, his roles were in more popular and successful films. His persona of being a leading man in mainstream action films, no matter his age, was cemented. He also became credited more for his acting ability, and his appearance in a film added an element of prestige to it. 4 years after Never Say Never Again, he won a Best Supporting Actor Oscar for his role in The Untouchables. When the dust settled, both films were hits, and each did very well at the box office. But Octopussy ended up grossing a bit more than Never Say Never Again. This would be the last time Connery played James Bond, unless you want to count voicing video games. But Roger Moore wasn't quite done yet.